5 men, 1 job, an hour of your questions from across the UK. How they answer tonight will help decide who becomes our next Prime Minister. Hello, good evening. One of the men here on stage will become our next Prime Minister. Tonight, for the very first time, we hear from all of them in a live televised debate. Dominic Raab was eliminated just 2 hours ago. The rest, Boris Johnson, Jeremy Hunt, Michael Gove, Sajid Javid and Rory Stewart are all here. We have questions coming in from around the UK. My job will be to seek clarification and direct answers where none is forthcoming. We'll hear views on their Brexit solutions and on other issues that deeply affect this country. The vast majority of us will not get a vote in the election for the next Tory leader, but over the course of this hour, we intend to give you the chance to get to know them better, test their mettle as a Prime Minister that must speak to and for the country. They've drawn lots for their order of seating this evening, and I will nudge them along if their answers are waffly and take too much time. So let's go to our very first question, and that's Lee Ward, who joins us from Norwich. Good evening, Lee. What's your question for our panel?
Good evening, gentlemen. As a lifelong Conservative voter, I voted for the Brexit Party in the recent European elections. My question to you all is, can you guarantee that you will be able to get your Brexit plan through the Parliament by the 31st of October?
Can you guarantee, Lee, Boris Johnson, you can get your Brexit plan through by the 31st of October? We will be leaving then.
Lee, you're absolutely right to ask that question because we must come out on the 31st of October because otherwise I'm afraid we face a catastrophic loss of confidence in politics. We've already kicked the can down the road twice and I think the British people are getting thoroughly fed up. Whether you voted Remain or Leave, the people were asked a question, they returned a verdict, the politicians said that they were going to honour that verdict. 3 years later, we have still failed to leave. And unless we do it, unless we get out on October the 31st, I think that we will all start to pay a really, really serious price. Our party, the party that you used to support, is now on 17 points in the polls. The Labour Party isn't doing much better. Politicians need to take their responsibilities and act maturely and soberly in the interests of democracy and of the electorate and get this thing done.
Well, Lee, it's a very important question. If I got to the 31st of October and there was no prospect of a deal that can get us out of the EU, then I would be out. I'd leave without a deal. If there was a prospect, if we were nearly there, then I would take a bit longer because the Conservative Party is the party of business, we're the part of the union, we're the party of hope, and I would want to avoid the disruption of no deal, the risk of a general election that could let in Jeremy Corbyn. But we have to resolve this, and we have to resolve this quickly, because this is about trust of the British people in people like us, the politicians, whether we actually do what we're told or whether we impose our will, and we mustn't let them down.
Michael Gove, you're asked for a guarantee by October the 31st.
Absolutely. Well, Lee, look, I share your frustration. I was the first person on this panel to argue that we should leave the European Union. I've believed it all my life, and that is why I am so upset that we haven't left. So angry that not everyone in the House of Commons has honoured that referendum result and got us to leave. And because I started this, I will finish it. I will make sure that we leave the European Union in good order. But I think Jeremy has a fair point. Look, if we're almost there on October the 30th and we just need an extra couple of days to do it, who could object to taking an extra 24 or 48 hours to get it over the line? You sometimes have extra time in football matches in order to slot home the winner. My view is the most important thing is to win for Britain, and that means getting out, honouring the vote that you gave, and also making sure that the case that I made in the referendum campaign and which you were good enough to support wins.
Sajid Javid, is it fundamental that we leave by or before the 31st of October?
It is fundamental. And first of all, thank you, Lee, for voting Conservative in the past. What we need to do is win your vote back and millions others like you. And that means that as a result of this historic vote, the biggest turnout we've ever seen in any election or in any referendum, it is essential that we act on those instructions. That's what they were. They were instructions from the British people. They are our bosses, the British people, to us, the politicians. And so far, we have failed. We've failed to act on those instructions, and it is fundamental that it has to be by October the 31st. And I do respectfully disagree with Jeremy and Michael on this, because we've got to learn from our mistakes. One of the mistakes we've made so far is by having this sort of flexible deadline. If you don't have a deadline, you do not concentrate minds, and that also includes the minds of our European friends. So we have to set the date.
OK,
we have to
we're going to hear from Rory Stewart now on this one.
So, Lee, we owe you two things. We owe you a real sense of urgency. You voted to leave the European Union. We need to leave the European Union as quickly and efficiently as legally as possible. But we also owe you something else fundamental, and that is our trust. We need to be honest with you about two difficulties. Unfortunately, it is not going to be possible to negotiate a new deal with the European Union by the 31st of October. And that's not just something I feel. It's something that Nigel Farage has said, and Steve Baker, who's one of Boris Johnson's supporters, says the same thing. So if you tried to negotiate a new deal with the European Union, we'd be stuck in the European Union for months and years to come. It wouldn't be that they would be just a few weeks off getting it done on October 31st. They would hardly have begun. And the second thing is we live in a parliamentary democracy. There's only one door out of this, which is through Parliament. So I would save the time by not wasting the time pretending I was going to negotiate a new deal with Brussels. I would say to all these people on the platform who voted for the deal, take the shock of the European elections, let's get on with it, let's vote it through, let's get it done. And that's the quickest and most legal way of doing it.
We've heard from all of you about the importance of leaving in good order, about how essential it is about taking your responsibilities seriously. Rory Stewart, I put it to you that you are offering the same approach that failed for Theresa May, not once but 3 times. You want MPs to approve a deal that's already been tested.
In the end, we are in a room with a door, and the door is called Parliament. And I'm the only person here trying to find the key to the door. Everybody else is staring at the wall, shouting, "Believe in Britain."
But we've run into that door 3 times already, Rory. But we've got to have a different route out. We can't simply represent the same cold porridge for a 4th time and ask people to say that that's what they want. We need to have a different approach. Now, where I think you are right and realistic is that if you have an arbitrary date, and we get so close, Emily, to being able to get the line over, I think that the view that Boris and Sajid have articulated, which is, do you know what, we'll just rip up all the progress we've made and go out without a deal.
It's not an arbitrary date, it is October the 31st. So when is your last leaving date?
Well, I've argued that we should leave at the earliest possible opportunity, and I believe the most important thing, as the first person
what does that
in
mean?
This group...
Will it be 2019?
No, absolutely 2019. And I think that we can do that. I think we can do that because we can make progress and we can ensure that we're in a position to leave. But the worry I have about Boris's position, we fought together on the Leave campaign. Boris joined me on that campaign, so we both believe it in our heart. But my worry is that, Boris, if we got to October the 31st and we were so close to getting that deal over the line, would you at that point say, Michael, we're almost there.
I
didn't hear a guarantee. Can you just give me that guarantee
I share
that it was
Michael's.
October the 31st? Can you give me that guarantee?
Michael was guaranteeing to get out by the end of December. I think that October the 31st is eminently feasible.
No, that's not a guarantee. Is that your date?
And let me just say that if we now say that we have a deadline that is not a deadline, and we allow October the 31st to come and go as March came and went and April came and went, I think the public will look upon us with increasing mystification. And we will continue to hemorrhage support.
Anyone on the stage guarantee it yet? Can you just raise your hand if there is a guarantee to leave by October the 31st? Just raise your hand if you can guarantee that.
Let me just ask you this question. OK, so I would agree with you. If the only way we can leave is without a deal, then I would do that. But what would you say to a sheep farmer that I met in Shropshire recently whose business would be destroyed by 40% tariffs on lamb? Now, if you were just before the 31st of October and there was a deal in sight, but you gave up and you said, no, this is a hard deadline, we're out, he would look at you and he'd say, Boris, you got your dream, you went to number 10, but you've destroyed my dream, which is a family business.
Of course, and nobody, Jeremy, wants a no deal, a disorderly no deal of that kind. but it is important to prepare for no deal. I congratulate what you and Michael and others have done to prepare for no deal. I think actually, Emily, there's a wide measure of consensus that we must get out on October the 31st. We must prepare for no deal.
How?
And that is the way.
Yes.
That is the way that we will get the deal that we need. And the way to come out is not with a disorderly Brexit, but with what everybody understands, taking the solution of the Irish border issues, putting that into the implementation period after we have come out.
There is no solution without the backstop.
Of course, no,
There
that's
is no
not true
solution
at all.
without
Everybody understands the solutions.
You do need to have a deadline. You absolutely need to have a deadline, because without that, you won't focus minds. I mean, anyone who's negotiated anything, they know you need to have a deadline. Okay. And in terms of what we can get through that door, as Rory called it, what we can get through the door is what's already gone through the door, which is the withdrawal agreement with a change to the backstop. This is the only credible plan, and it can be done.
We're staying with Brexit. We're going to Carmela in a moment. But before, if you do want to follow this debate, including analysis from our political correspondents and reality check team, you can see all the latest on our live page at bbc.co.uk/news. But our next speaker is Carmela Tompkins from Southampton. Hi, Carmela. What's your question?
Hi. Good evening. My question, as a mother of 3 with a husband in the property industry, if we have a no deal, my husband could lose his job and my children face an uncertain future. Why are you even contemplating a no deal Brexit?
Why, Michael Gove, are you even contemplating a no-deal Brexit?
Because we've got to leave the European Union. We had 17.4 million people who voted to leave, and we said as Parliament, look, it's your decision. We can't have a situation where we say to all the people of this country, it's up to you to decide, we're your servants, we will follow through. Now, I do agree that a no-deal Brexit would create some economic turbulence. And as Jeremy very fairly pointed out, there are some parts of our country, if we don't plan properly for a no-deal Brexit, that will suffer. But we absolutely need to ensure that we are ready for whatever comes, prepared for whatever comes, and above all, that we make sure that we put our democracy first.
Michael
Because
Gove,
unless...
You've just heard from Carmela, who's
Yes.
worried about the future of her husband, his job, and their children.
Well,
you can't say anything to reassure her.
Well, what I can say is that, of course, there are challenges in no deal, but we're a great country. We can get through it. And there are things that we can do in order to ensure that outside the European Union we prosper. One of the things, I suspect that I'm one of the few candidates, perhaps the only candidate, who's actually explained how we can be wealthier, greener and freer outside the European Union.
I'll bring you in briefly,
with
Rory,
new trade deals and a transformed economy.
Michael Gove, thanks.
OK. How, given that Parliament does not consent to no deal, how are you going to deliver no deal against the consent of Parliament? Because that's what you're going to have to do, all of you. If you're leaving by the 31st of October, if you're leaving no deal on the table, please will someone tell me how you are going to do it against the consent of Parliament?
I think it's very important for Carmela to understand that none of us wants a no-deal outcome. We don't want a disorderly Brexit, which is what you're talking about, and that obviously would be the kind of Brexit that would damage.
It would be perfectly OK. Sorry, those words were yours. It would be perfectly OK, was what you said.
However, it is very, very important, however, to prepare for that eventuality. It is responsible to do that, and actually a great deal of work has been done to protect hill farmers, to make sure that we have the right chains of command in Northern Ireland for administration of hospitals and so on, and of course to prepare small businesses as well.
Is he right?
A huge
Are
amount
we
of
well
work
prepared?
has been done.
Carmela's going to be fine.
We can prepare more. I think one of the fundamental mistakes we've made so far is we didn't prepare well enough. And that's why we're in this mess today. You prepare for no deal precisely because you want a deal. It is that preparation which focuses minds again, because the EU doesn't want no deal either. And the best way to get a deal is to make sure you're prepared and to be that responsible Prime Minister ready for all possibilities. And can I...
Absolutely right. Sajid is absolutely right.
Let me answer Carmela's question, because your husband's in the property business. So he will know that the only way you get deals in the property business is to hold on the table the ability to walk away from a deal that isn't right. And the truth is, if you do what Rory's saying, which is you take no deal off the table, what is going to happen in that situation is we won't get a deal. And then the worst thing for you and your family and your children is we'll still be arguing about Brexit in a year's time because we won't have left the European Union. So the reason why we need to keep no deal on the table is to make sure we get a deal. But, and I think there is a difference here, it should only be a very, very last resort because families' livelihoods are at risk. As Conservatives, we are the party of business, we're the party of the union, and we want to make absolutely sure
Carmela,
that we
are you
protect those as much as
reassured
we
with
can.
what you've heard here this evening?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not reassured at all. I'm really concerned about the future for my children. I have one working in the city, I have one training to be a vet, and I have one going to university in September. I'm worried about the future, and I'm worried about my husband's job.
Okay.
No one can give a real answer to what will happen if we have a no deal.
Carmela, thank you very much indeed.
My answer.
You had that chance to reassure her.
Okay. Of the channel wants a disorderly Brexit of the kind that you're describing and the kind that you think threatens your husband's job. We are going to make sure that we come out on terms that protect the UK and protect the EU as well. And that's
very
what we're
briefly, Rory Stewart, very briefly.
As an answer, if I were lucky enough to be your Prime Minister, I am committed that there would never be no deal. It is unnecessary, it is damaging, and it is so unnecessary and damaging. As Jeremy has said, it is not even a credible threat. You can't negotiate that. Jeremy is saying
then you are saying you'd be happy with no Brexit.
I'm
totally wrong for our country.
We can't hear. We're going to go to Mark, who's in Belfast now.
We have a deal.
Panel,
we're
going to our guest.
550-page deal. A 550-page deal.
Rory Stewart, we can't hear anything. Can you please hold back? We're trying to hear from Mark, who's in Belfast, with his question. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Good evening, gentlemen. I just wanted to say I grew up during the Troubles and I've seen how a free and open border to the Republic of Ireland has helped secure both peace but give us support trade and development. So can the candidates explain how they will solve the issue of the Irish border, a subject many people here see as Theresa May's downfall?
Now, Theresa May has tried to solve this one. She's tried to solve it for 3 years and she couldn't. So the question is how? How will you, right? Not empty promises. How will you? Jeremy Hunt, you seem to think you've got Merkel and Macron on speed dial with an easy route to them. So tell us what they're saying.
Well, what they're saying is very straightforward. They're saying that it's the UK that has the border with the Republic of Ireland. It's for us to come forward with the solutions that would work. And actually, I think everyone here would agree with you that what we can't have is a return to border infrastructure on the island of Ireland, because that was one of the fundamental achievements of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, that free border that allowed people to move easily from north to south and allow businesses to trade easily.
But you still haven't told us what they're going to agree to.
So what was problematic about the Irish border was not that. What was problematic was the suggestion that we should be trapped in the customs union until the EU gave us permission to leave. And that will never get through Parliament. So we have to find a way of showing that we can keep that border open, keep what we call a soft border. And I think through technology we can do that. But we have to do that in a way that doesn't trap us in the customs union, because leaving the EU is about regaining our sovereignty. And regaining our sovereignty means that we have to
You're talking about
destiny.
money. You're talking about giving Ireland 500 million to help unlock this problem. You think it's about money?
I think money will help, because the solution, the ultimate solution to keeping an open border, and can I just say that as someone who's responsible for security and counter-terrorism, that was a very, very hard-won piece on the island of Ireland, and we cannot risk that in any way whatsoever. I would be absolutely 100% committed to the Good Friday Agreement and keeping there's an open border. And now I've done the work on this. In my department today, we have Border Force. Border Force has looked at this. It is perfectly possible to have an open border with 2 different customs arrangements on either side of the border using existing technology. Obviously, it will take time to put that in place. It will cost money.
So you'd have the backstop until that technology was in place?
You would have the backstop until that technology exists. On the backstop. a time limit
They won't
on the
agree
back.
to
So,
that.
no, so first of all,
You
our
can't have a
Parliament,
backstop that has a time limit on it. You've heard that from Ireland.
Our Parliament will not agree to a backstop that is not time limited. A permanent backstop it will not be agreed to. So the Irish understand that. They know there's going to have to be some agreement on this. And also the EU has said themselves that the backstop itself cannot be permanent under the EU's own laws. So there will have to be some sort of compromise on this eventually.
Leo Varadkar said literally this weekend, if we don't have the backstop, there is no deal. What do you do now?
Well, actually, I agree strongly with both with Saj and with Jeremy. Nobody, and I remember what it was like during the Troubles. Of course, I remember what that border was like.
To the congestion charge in Islington and Westminster.
That's
how seriously you took this issue.
Nobody wants to see a return of any kind of infrastructure or hard border. Of course not. And the UK government will never, ever do that. Now, what you can do is, of course, as Jeremy has just said and Sajid has just said, you can solve the questions of how to keep goods flowing freely across that border whilst the UK comes out of the EU as a whole. Okay. You can solve that issue during the implementation period whilst we negotiate the free trade deal.
Why would
that is the way forward.
And actually, there is a very wide
measure of agreement.
You're not going to get an implementation period,
sides of the House.
Boris Johnson, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Why would they sign up to that implementation period?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because I think there are several incentives. First of all, our European EU friends now have 29 members of the Brexit party in Strasbourg that are not a wholly welcome presence. Number two, they have the incentive of and solvent of £39 billion that they will get. They want us out of the. They want us out of the EU. Then they want this done, and they don't want a disorderly Brexit. In the end, they are not going to want, for exactly the reasons that Rory and others have given. They don't want that kind of...
The fundamental... Because everyone else recognises that it is a problem that needs solving. You don't.
I don't at all. I think this should be an open border, as was guaranteed in the Good Friday Agreement. When I was in Enniskillen and when I was in Londonderry, I saw very directly that all the policies of all these gentlemen talking about tariff barriers, and at the centre of your policy, Boris, is the question of your agricultural tariffs. So imagine, I'm sure like me, you've been in Enniskillen, sitting with a sheep farmer. They're sending their sheep across the border to the Republic. 80% of the sheep are processed, I'm sure you know, in the abattoirs of the Republic. What are going to be your tariff arrangements on that border?
Rory,
what are you going to do? What are you going to do about the?
What are you going to do? You want to come in on this?
I have.
1 second, Michael. You're going to finish that answer to Rory Stewart, and then Michael Gove.
He's going to change the subject.
I'll give him the answer. The answer is there will be no tariffs and there will be no quotas.
There'll be no agricultural tariffs.
Because what we want to do is to get a standstill in our current arrangements under GATT 24 or whatever it happens to be until such time as we have negotiated the FTA. And it's in the context of that free trade agreement that we come up with the facilitations.
Boris talks about GATT 24. Some people have said that the backstop is catch-22. But actually, the way in which we resolve it is not just about economics. The Northern Ireland peace process is about much more than just trade across the border. I've worked in Northern Ireland, and I know there are several things we need to do. We need to get the institutions up and running, the Assembly back in Northern Ireland. At the moment, Northern Ireland's nationalists, the SDLP, don't have representation in the governance of the UK. We need to give them a voice. The next thing we need to do is to recognise, as Rory mentioned, that there are delicate relationships on the border between Londonderry and Donegal, between County Down and Dundalk. So we need to make sure that border communities receive the support they need. And then the third thing that we also do need to do is we need to supercharge work on alternative arrangements. Saj is right. The EU have explicitly said that the backstop is only intended to be temporary. And the EU have also said that they're going to work with us in order to make sure
You've said
that we can
personally lead the way on this, Michael Gove.
Absolutely.
And you were the one that opposed the Good Friday Agreement and called it a moral stain, a denial of our national integrity. Are you welcome there?
Yes, I am. I have incredibly good relations with the Irish government and indeed with politicians on both sides of the sectarian divide. I've worked in Northern Ireland and critically, yes, I was critical of Tony Blair because of the way that he handled the peace process at certain points, but it's also the case that I've worked successfully with the Irish Agriculture Minister and Simon Coveney, the Deputy Prime Minister in the Republic of Ireland, in a constructive fashion, and It has been said by them that what we need to have is a comprehensive solution to these problems, and I have a plan. The others have observations.
I understand you're saying there's no reality.
There's literally no reality. Europe made it clear that the extension that Boris is talking about is conditional on the withdrawal agreement. Europe has made it entirely clear in the last council, legally binding, that they would not be renegotiating between now and the 31st of October. Every single one of these people is not explaining how they're going to do it. Right?
Well,
Emily,
because we've heard from each of you and we've heard your views on how. Let's go back to Mark in Belfast. Did you hear that how answered?
Not really, no. I think there's a lot of confusion here in Northern Ireland and a lot of fear as well, particularly if we do go crashing out without a deal. So I was hoping for more, and hopefully over the next couple of weeks we'll get a wee bit more information.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. We're leaving Brexit now, to James in Oxford. James, hello.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I used to be a Conservative voter, but I now consider myself partyless. I have reluctantly voted for the Brexit Party. My question to all of you is, what is your plan to lift the tax burden on the working classes?
What is your plan to lift the tax burden on the working classes? Sajid Javid, you kick us off on this one.
Well, I understand that. And what that shows you, and given that you've said you voted for the Brexit Party, is that delivering Brexit is more than just leaving the EU. In some ways, you could even argue that's the easier bit. There were a lot of frustrations and aspirations that went into that historic vote. And I think that's one of them. We have too much pressure on working people today through cost of living, including on taxes. And my priority in terms of tax cuts would be tax cuts that will help working people the most. And I think as a country, we can afford that, because over the last 9 years, because of the hard work of the British people, we've dealt with exactly the huge deficit that we inherited, and we can afford to start cutting taxes.
So tax cuts for the working classes and not the high earners, is that right?
I would focus on tax cuts for working people through the basic rate of tax.
OK, Jeremy Hunt, I think you've talked about slashing corporation tax to 12.5%, a cut worth 13 billion to businesses who've had their taxes cut repeatedly, virtually annually, under your government already. Your priority is big business.
Not at all. First of all, James, life is very, very expensive in the southeast of England, in a city like Oxford. The cost of housing is extortionate. And I absolutely think our Conservative mission, if I'm Prime Minister, will be to reduce the tax burden on the lowest paid. I've said I would like to see everyone in this country be able to earn the first £1,000 every month without any income tax or national insurance, because that would lighten the load. The question is, Emily, how you get there. And the way to do that, the way we can afford those tax cuts, is to turbocharge the economy. I'm someone who set up their own business. I think if we can bring down our taxes on business, we can get our growth rate up. If we got a growth rate that was closer to the American growth rate of 3% rather than half that, which is what we're on at the moment, we'd have an extra £20 billion for tax cuts on people on low income, for public services like the NHS that I was lucky enough to be responsible for. That, I think, is a vision that brings the country together, because what people accuse the Conservatives of is they say we are the party of the rich.
Okay.
We must never fall into the trap of doing
Talking
tax
about the
cuts
party for the rich, Boris Johnson, under your proposed tax cuts, those earning £79,000 would still not be considered wealthy enough to pay the higher bracket of income tax.
Well, can I just say that to get to James's point about what we would do to help the poorest in society, I was very proud when I was Mayor of London massively to have expanded the London living wage, a policy that put millions of pounds into the pockets of the poorest families across
and can you
our
just
capital.
Answer my question, £79,000 and you're not in the higher bracket of tax, Boris Johnson.
Our national government. And I also think, by the way, since you asked, Emily,
Thank you.
Forgive me, I also think that we should be lifting the thresholds for national insurance for the low paid. But I do think it's relevant for us all to have a debate about the thresholds for the higher rate of taxation. It does seem to me seem to me to be very odd that that in the Conservative Party people should seriously question whether it is right to try to lift nurses and heads of maths departments and police inspectors out of the top rate of tax.
But
I think that's a
just
good
second.
thing to do.
You've had the debate. You've had the debate in the Telegraph newspaper. So is it clear in your mind now that that tax cut would go ahead for higher earners?
Well, what we would bring forward is a package to help primarily the poorest in society by lifting the thresholds, as I say, for national insurance. But I think it's very sensible to have an ambition to raise the higher rate of tax for middle income earners. And we're taking the definition, by the way, from Labour's own ordinary
that's 3 times
working families.
The average wage, what you've suggested.
Labour's
Michael Gove, explain your tax policy to us. You want to abolish VAT, replace it with a lower, simpler sales tax. What does that do or mean?
Well, Emily, I'm the candidate in this race who is most pro-working people and most pro the relief of poverty. And I have a detailed plan. And I feel it in my heart. My dad was a small businessman who lost his business. My mum was a shop assistant. I know what it is like for working people to face difficult circumstances. So I would take advantage of the fact that we leave the EU and we can replace VAT. VAT is a tax that hits the poorest worst. I would replace it with a more flexible sales tax. I would also reduce business rates for small businesses to help those people who are genuinely...
Does it make goods cheaper? I genuinely don't understand.
I'm just outlining my plan. Who genuinely generate the jobs and the investment that we need in order to allow our economy to grow. And the other thing that I would do is I would look at the interaction between universal credit and income tax to help the very poorest. And I'm a great fan of Boris in many ways, but I think Boris is making one mistake on tax, which is that of the money that we have, he's concentrating on cutting taxes for folk who earn what MPs earn and what millionaires earn. I think that is wrong. I went into politics to help the very poorest in our society, and I think that is the way in which we show that we are actually a party that can take on Jeremy Corbyn. Because the other thing is, we haven't yet talked about Jeremy Corbyn on this programme.
I don't want to speak about Jeremy
No,
Corbyn
I think we do
There's
need to.
so much to go through the 5 of you
because
here.
Jeremy Corbyn isn't interested in helping working people. He's interested in standing up for the Iranian regime, not working classes in this country. I am the candidate with a detailed plan that will help working people and make sure that the poorest in our society benefit from economic growth.
But you were losing James, as it were, to the Brexit Party, not to Labour. Rory Stewart, you're not going to get James back again if you say, I'm a Conservative, but I don't really believe in tax cuts.
I believe the way that we get everybody back and reunify the country is being honest and realistic. And the thing that slightly depresses me in this debate is everybody, I feel, is promising things. They're promising they're going to get a new deal out of Brussels that they're not going to get. They're promising to get a no deal through Parliament, which they can't deliver. And they're now promising cumulatively, all of them together, have promised nearly £84 billion worth of tax cuts. I'm going to be very straight with people. I don't think this is the time to be cutting taxes, because I'm not thinking about promises for the next 15 days. I'm thinking about the next 15 years. Our country is suffering huge pressures on public services. If I can deliver a good, safe, pragmatic Brexit, and that's a big if, because that would have to avoid doing everything you're saying.
I'm going to hurry you along, because that's where we're coming to next.
I would be spending the money not on tax cuts, but on investing in our public services, and I would not be committing tax cuts or spending when we don't have the money.
Let's bring James back in. Have they won you back, James?
I think the only one who talked sense there was Jeremy Hunt, so thank you, Jeremy. You actually talked sense there. And Rory, you're completely out of touch. You just did not answer my question. It's nothing to do with Brexit. It's about tax cuts, but thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, James. We're going to Tina now, who's in Tunbridge Wells. Tina.
Good evening. Whilst all this Brexit things are going on, so many important issues are going under the radar. So my question to you is, I have fostered more than 100 children over 27 years. Despite the support from my local authority, I now struggle to get appropriate mental health services, special educational needs support, and even doctor's appointments. What are you going to do for vulnerable children?
All of you. Can you pledge to reverse some of those cuts that Tina is talking about? You just called yourself, Michael Gove, the pro-relief on poverty candidate. So what do you say to Tina now?
Tina, the first thing I want to say is thank you. I myself spent the first 4 months of my life in care, and I was adopted by a wonderful mum and dad. And I know that people like you who foster children who've been through very, very difficult times are heroes in our society. And one of the things that I've outlined is a plan to better help children who are in care and who are at risk to find people like you who can give them loving homes. But it's also the case that you're right, that we've got a problem with mental health provision, and we also have a problem with support for children who have special educational needs, which is why I've said that we need to both increase the funding for education so that we go back to the levels that we had in the past, where every child has their funding protected in real terms, but also I've outlined a plan, a detailed plan, to target that money on the very poorest children and those who are most in need. And one of the things that I will also do is to make sure that for people like yourself, we look at how we can better financially support those who are making a commitment to vulnerable children.
What does that actually mean? Because all of you have been part of a government that has cut the spending power of local councils by almost 30% in real terms in the last decade. What do you reverse? What do you reverse, Rory Stewart?
Well, one thing we won't reverse, Emily, are the changes that I made that made it easier for children to be adopted. And one thing I won't reverse...
We're talking about spending cuts to local councils.
No, but I think it's important. One thing I won't reverse are the changes in education, which mean that more than 1.9 million more children are in good and outstanding schools, and that we have a focus on the very poorest.
Let some of the other candidates in, because there have been cuts to local services that Tina has been talking about just now. Will you reverse any of those if you are Prime Minister?
Yes, if we can deliver a sensible Brexit that unlocks opportunities for our economy. My difference with the other candidates here is that if they were to get more money, they're going to give it away in tax cuts. I think that is the wrong thing to do in this country. We do not need more tax cuts. If there is more money available, we need to invest in our public services. And I know I'm making myself very unpopular because the gentleman who asked the question wants me to promise something that we cannot afford. If we have a no-deal Brexit, very sadly, we're going to have... No, I was the last gentleman who was telling me
You're
off
about tax
for not
cuts,
pledging
James,
the
in
tax
Oxford,
cuts.
yeah.
The two things are, of course, and this is one of the reasons this debate feels a little bit unreal. The two things are related. The money you spend comes from your taxes. If you're cutting the taxes, you could have less money to spend.
So what are you going to reverse? You voted for him, Sajid Javid. You voted... Sorry, we can't hear. We can't hear.
Rory, what is your plan, Rory,
finish
for
quickly?
education and children's services? What would you change?
Can I try to finish? OK. On education, there's an enormous amount we can do. One of the most exciting things we can do, which is planning for the next 15 years of our country, is to think about the ways that AI and robotics are going to change the entire world of work. I don't think we've grasped that.
Okay.
But what we're talking about at the moment...
We're talking about cuts, though. No, I want to go to Sajid Javid because he hasn't spoken.
Okay.
Michael Gove, wait.
I relied on public service my entire life. My family didn't have much, and whether it's education or healthcare, those were my lifelines.
But you voted for these cuts.
Well, in fact, my track record, when I ran the Department for Local Government, I actually increased spending power of local authorities. And since then, it's continued to increase. But what we do need to do, when I look ahead, if I was Prime Minister, we do need to reset spending in certain areas, and I think local government is one of those. Health is already been identified as one of those. And the other one, certainly for me, is education, especially schools and colleges, including special needs education. But the question is how are you going to fund it? That's the key question. Because it's easy to make spending pledges without how you're going to fund it. And I'll say two things. I mean, first of all, tax cuts can sometimes lead to more revenue. If you get a more dynamic economy, and that's been the history in the last few years, tax cuts have led to more revenue. That's the first thing. Secondly, we can afford in the short term to borrow more. We can do that because the work that we've done in the last few years has paid off.
I think we've left Tina's question far behind. Jeremy Hunt, we've had a lot of questions over the past few days about austerity, about universal credit, about food banks, 1.6 million food parcels handed out by the UK's biggest food bank network, a record. Do any of you accept a link between welfare cuts and poverty?
Well, I want to answer Tina's question very directly. I think, having been responsible for health and social care, that some of the cuts in social care did go too far. And I want to thank you to have helped 100 young people from very disadvantaged backgrounds into the world. You are one of the people who make our society work. And a Conservative government, under me, but I think under any of us, must be there for people like you. So what will we do? Let me tell you what I do. First of all, I do think that local authorities need more money for the social care system, but I also think we need better mental health provision. Because when I was Health Secretary, I remember meeting a young woman who'd been cutting herself right the way up her arm. It was totally horrific. And the truth is we leave it too late to intervene with mental health, and these conditions then get get trapped and it becomes much harder to do something about it. But more importantly, and most importantly, Michael did remarkable reforms at education.
But I want to
think
lead
sometimes,
you back to the place that was
where
where we started. The link
100
between
children.
welfare cuts
the truth is
and
that still
poverty.
Too many children leave school unable to read and write properly. And if you have nearly 25% of primary school leavers unable to read, well, I want us to be the Conservative government that abolishes illiteracy, so that all the young people you're looking after can look forward to their future with more confidence.
I want to say I agree very strongly with what Jeremy has just said. But we also need to be investing much more in our educational system. I'm afraid that there have been reductions in spending in real terms.
And a lot of the other emails were about food bank use
we need to be
and
joining
cuts to
up our mental health care systems. So they do
as a candidate, believe that our care system is a disgrace. It's a scandal. It can't be tinkered with round the edges. It's the great unfinished revolution in our society. We set up the NHS. We have not sorted out social care. And in order to fund it properly, we're going to need considerably more money. I would reach across party. We've had white papers, green papers, royal commissions, and the reason we've never managed to fund it properly is we haven't got out of our party silos. We're not going to fund it through more tax cuts. We're going to have to get more money for this. And in order to do that,
your plan?
Well, it's exactly there in detail in Andrew Dilnot's proposal when we're talking about social care. And the question is how to fund it and the conversation with Labour, because I'm not setting red lines, because the difference between me and the other candidates around this table is I don't believe the way you negotiate is by setting red lines and making impossible promises on television. I believe that you sit down with the opposition and solve the great unfinished scandal in our society.
Rory, you need a plan. It's a great thing to bring people together, and we all want to do that.
We have more plans than you can believe. Okay. White papers, green papers, royal commissions. The problem isn't planning.
What is your plan, Rory? You don't have
We're going to move on. We've got Abdullah waiting for us in Bristol. Evening, Abdullah. What's your question for the panel here?
Evening, Emily. Evening, gentlemen. I'm the Imam of a mosque and I see firsthand the everyday impact of Islamophobic rhetoric on my community. Do the candidates agree that words have consequences?
Do the candidates agree that words have consequences? Boris Johnson, in the past you've said Muslim women who wear veils look like letterboxes and bank robbers. Do you accept your words have consequences? You've just heard that from an imam.
Of course, and insofar as my words have given offence over the last 20 or 30 years when I've been a journalist and people have taken those words out of my articles and escalated them, of course I'm sorry for the offence that they have caused. But I would just say this to our friend from Bristol, that when my Muslim great-grandfather came to this country in fear of his life in 1912, he did so because he knew it was a place that was a beacon of generosity and openness and a willingness to welcome people from around the world. And
what would he think of you using those words then about the community?
If I am Prime Minister, I will ensure that that is the way our country acts and behaves. And I may say that in respect of what my friend over there says,
Abdullah.
Of course, what Abdullah says,
right.
Of course, I think my Muslim great-grandfather would have been astonished to have found that his great-grandson had become foreign secretary.
The question was, though, do you accept that
he would have been very proud, and that would have been, I think, a tribute to this country.
Mr Johnson, do you accept that words have consequences? You are frequently careless with your language. Do you worry that you may do more harm than good? I'm going to raise the issue of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, and this was your comment. When I look at what Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was doing, she was simply teaching people journalism. As I understand it, you know what that did to her jail sentence in a Tehran jail.
Well, actually, I think it's very, very important, Emily, that in this context we should pay tribute to the work of the Foreign Office in doing what they can to get out very difficult consular cases. But in seeking to point the finger either at me or at anybody in the UK for the incarceration of Nazanin or anybody else, I have deepest sympathy clearly for Nazanin and her family. But in pointing the finger at our side...
Words have consequences. That was Abdullah's phrase.
At our side, well, actually, in that case, it didn't, I think, make any difference. But if you point the finger at the UK, all you are doing is exculpating those who
So
are
you can use what language you like.
who are truly responsible, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
And when Donald Trump,
that is the reality. And people should realise what this regime is up to.
Okay,
and,
I'm going to ask
that is where
the question to
responsibility
Jeremy
lies.
Hunt. When Donald Trump retweets offensive, irascible comments about Londonistan, you say you don't like the language, but basically you agree 150% with the content of the tweet.
No. What I said was I agreed with his sentiment that Sadiq Khan has been a useless London mayor when it comes to tackling knife crime, but I totally disagree with his words, and I totally disagree with the racist rants of Katie Hopkins. And let me tell you why. I am married to an immigrant. I have 3 half-Chinese children. When they go to school, they look different to the other kids. And you know, the best thing about this country is it doesn't matter at all. Nobody says anything. We are one of the most open, outward-looking, tolerant countries on the planet, and we must do everything we can to preserve and protect that, particularly at the point of Brexit, where people worry that, I think wrongly, but they worry that somehow our culture might change. And I think we have to show people the Brexit that the Conservatives are going to deliver is a tolerant Brexit. We're not going to put the shutters down and say foreigners not welcome. We're going to remain that brilliant, welcoming country.
Sajid Javid, you've said you'd be happy to open up the Conservative Party to an independent investigation over allegations of Islamophobia. Would you like everyone on the stage who becomes our next Prime Minister, anyone, to commit to that?
Yes, I would. Do you all agree, guys? Should we have an external investigation of the Conservative Party into Islamophobia?
Absolutely.
They all agree. Rory, do you agree?
Excellent.
They agree.
OK, that was easy.
But can I say a bit more than that? Can I say a bit more than that? And it's great that we all agree on that. Is that, first of all, if I can say to Abdullah, my parents were Muslim immigrants to our great country, and they also settled eventually in Bristol, and actually have many Muslim friends and family in Bristol and around the UK. And Abdullah is absolutely right to raise this. Words do have consequences, absolutely. But I think also behind it, Abdullah, is a concern, and is right to have that concern of growing anti-Muslim hatred in our country. It's certainly over the last few years in all parts of society, when wherever that is, including in political parties, it must be absolutely rooted out. We are today one of the most successful multiracial democracies in the world, whatever your race, whatever your religious background, and that's what we've got to remain. But we can't be complacent. We have to work hard. And that also means, by the way, you asked about President Trump. The US is our closest partner, and it always will be. But because we are friends, we are critical friends. And when someone says something wrong, we should be brave enough to call it out.
Actually, why didn't you call it out, Rory? You said something extraordinary, Rory Stewart. You said, I'm a diplomat. What was that about yesterday when you were asked about the tweet?
I feel very, very strongly that tweet, and indeed anything that you do with a foreign leader, is something that you have to be very firm on, very strong on, but that generally, if you're the Prime Minister, you have to do it in dignity and in private. But
would you call it out in public? If you were Prime Minister, would you call it out in public?
I think Donald Trump is an extraordinary phenomenon. I think
would you call it out?
Well, I certainly would call out Islam.
If you were Prime Minister, would you have done that?
So, Sajid, I think there's a difficult balance here. I think we have to... there are many... Wait, let me finish on this. I would firstly say to Abdullah, Assalamu alaikum, and that I am very, very, very proud to have you in this country. And I am also very disturbed that everybody around the stage, like me, says nice things, but unfortunately in this country there is more and more evidence of people saying, doing and thinking things about Muslims which are completely unacceptable and are nothing to do with our culture and traditions. And the same, unfortunately, increasingly seems to be true of the way that people are speaking about Jews.
Baroness Saidavasi, the former chairman of your party expressed unease about the idea of you becoming Prime Minister, given the things that you've said in the past about British Muslims.
Well, only last night, Baroness Noshina Mubarak, who is an elected Conservative Muslim in the European Parliament, endorsed me on the basis that I was the candidate best capable of bringing people together. And Abdullah is right. Words have consequences. Islamophobia, hatred towards people on the basis of their background or faith is repugnant. We should call it out. I have no hesitation in saying that some of the things that, for example, President Trump has said, no world leader should say. But we should also have no hesitation in saying that some of the things that Jeremy Corbyn has said about British Jewish citizens are disgusting. The fact that he said that the British Jewish citizens needed to discover a sense of irony. We should be clear. Yes, if there are Islamophobes in the Conservative Party, and there are, we should root them out. But Emily, we should also be clear. You can't have someone aspiring to be Prime Minister of this country who indulges the anti-Semitic hate speech that Jeremy Corbyn has indulged. We need to call him out. I'm sure we all agree.
I'm sure you do agree on that one. Let's go to Erin for our next question. Erin's 15. She's in Glasgow. Thanks for joining us, Erin. What's your question to the panel?
Hi. So, on behalf of youth strikers all over the UK, I'd like to ask, can you promise that the environment will be your top priority if elected? Will you commit to net zero carbon emissions by 2025?
2025, yes. So you've all agreed to 2050. Show of hands, who's going to commit to doing what Erin is asking, which is halving that, bring it right down to 2025?
I'm going to commit to putting the environment at the centre of my programme. How about that?
You got in there.
That was Erin's first demand. I'll do that.
Yeah. OK, so again, we're back. If you're happy for me to reply, Erin. I think we absolutely want to put climate and the environment at the heart of everything we do. My first act as Secretary of State of DFID was to say that I want to double the amount that we spend on climate and the environment. I'm deeply proud that we've set the 2050 target. The 2050 target is the most ambitious target so far set by any advanced industrial economy. We're going to be hosting the Climate Summit. This is a country that can take the lead in solar technology. We've got fantastic resources in the North Sea for carbon capture and storage, for offshore wind. I would like to make us the leader in the world in driving green and environmental change.
OK.
But we also have to do it in a way that's frank and honest.
Your house is on fire. That was what Greta Thunberg said.
Well, the thing is...
and the fire is taking 30 years to come.
First of all, thank you for your activism and helping to raise consciousness of this issue. I praise those people, even though I think folks should be in school, praise those people who went on the climate strike for raising awareness. I met Greta Thunberg as Environment Secretary. I've introduced a 25-year environment plan to ensure that we help increase the amount of energy that's generated by renewables, but also we do everything from restoring the habitats, the trees and forests which act as carbon sinks, to making sure that we rid our air of the pollution that is choking the lungs of young people, and also rid our seas of the plastic, which is a scourge. As Environment Secretary, I have one of the best jobs in the world because I can do everything I can in order to make sure that your generation get a cleaner and greener planet.
Commitments, though. Boris Johnson, you can now, as Prime Minister, as it were, stop Heathrow expansion. Will you?
Well, I continue to have grave reservations about the Heathrow Runway 3, not just from
the point of view of
air quality, but also, of course, noise pollution as well. And what I will do is I will continue to use all the instruments that Michael has rightly identified to reduce CO2. And I just remind you, when I was Mayor of London, the population
the Heathrow expansion question, because if you are Prime Minister, this will be a pressing issue. Do you stop the expansion now?
Emily, I still have grave concerns about the air quality impacts and the noise pollution impacts. And as you know, court cases are now proceeding, and as Prime Minister, I will be following those very closely indeed.
Jeremy
but in
Hunt,
reducing CO2, I look at what we did in London, with the population of London increased by 200,000, GDP over about 8 years, the GDP went up by about 10%. We cut CO2 emissions by 14%. And we did that, Erin, through technology. That is what you can do.
But Boris,
and this country is way
Jeremy
in the
Hunt.
lead.
Boris, Erin's question is not whether we're doing something, it's whether we are doing enough. And I think this is a fundamental matter of trust between teenagers and all of us here who are in our 40s and 50s as to whether young people can actually trust the next generation. They say, look, we're going to be around in 50 years' time. We don't know if you are going to be, and we want to know if the planet is going to be there and if you're going to look after the planet properly. The Conservative Party... Yes, I know.
And she's going to be 40 by the time we reach 2050.
Exactly. And so I certainly will commit to the net zero by 2050. We may be the first country... Yeah, that was what Erin said. I think that was good of her when I said by 2050.
You're going for 2025?
What I'm saying is, it was good of Erin to challenge us to be ambitious. We may well be the first country in the world to legally commit to net zero on 2050, and we need to do more.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm so pleased you've raised this. And there's actually, if I can say so, my own, I know you're 15, but my 16-year-old daughter has asked me about this so often and said, if you are Prime Minister, what are you going to do about this? And you're right to challenge us. And we have done quite a few things, and Michael and others over the last few years, but nowhere near enough. And we absolutely need to become carbon neutral. I think everyone understands it will take some time, but we have to be a lot more ambitious, especially in terms of renewable energy, in terms of helping people to buy electric cars and also to charge electric cars. So we can be ambitious and we can at the same time create a lot more jobs and be a world leader.
Erin, who's impressed you the most?
Well, to be honest, none of you have really impressed me in the way that I'm looking for. Climate change isn't an issue of tomorrow, it's an issue of today, and we need to take drastic critical action, and I don't think any of you are willing to offer that, so thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Erin. We're going to go to our last question now. This is Aman in London. You still have another chance. This is Aman who's going to talk to us. Hi there, Aman.
Hi. So in the event that you become Prime Minister, you're only going to be voted on by your parliamentary colleagues and 100,000 Conservative Party members. And you will have no mandate from the people. So in the event that you become Prime Minister, when will you do the right thing and call a general election?
I don't think the Labour Party particularly wants a general election. I don't think anybody in the House of Commons who's sensible really wants us to go to the country immediately. We've had a general election in 2015, we had one in 2017, we had a referendum in between.
I think our job is to get Boris Johnson. That's what you said when Gordon Brown became Prime Minister. That's what gets me. Gordon Brown will now be in 10 Downing Street without a mandate from the British people. No one elected Gordon Brown as Prime Minister. Let's have an election without delay. Why doesn't the same apply this time?
Because he wasn't taking over in the context of a national political crisis in which we have to get Brexit
So you're
over
saying
the line.
no general election?
And when we do that, when we've got it done, I think that then we have the opportunity as Conservatives to bring our country together, to do fantastic things with infrastructure, with education, with the environment and technology, to unite
We've
our
only got a
country
minute left.
and our society.
Will
And that will deal with many of the emotions
general
that Brexit
election
produced.
Until we have delivered Brexit.
Yep.
That's what we promised
Absolutely
to do the last time we went before the British people. That was a sacred promise. It's very, very important. We deliver that, and then we can go back to the British people, but we must do what we promised first.
General election till we have regained trust, till we've started to listen to people, till we've started to take action, till we've started to show that we believe in this country and we can make it a much, much better place.
There is so much more that we need to do.
That sounds like fear.
We need to crack on, deliver Brexit, and also use the opportunity of leaving the European Union to transform our country for the better. I have a detailed plan on how we can make sure that we can help the very poorest in our society, a detailed plan which means that we can increase economic growth, and a detailed plan to bring together those parts of the country that have been overlooked and undervalued, many of which voted leave. We can do all that, and then we can have a general election, and we can say to Jeremy Corbyn, you discredited Marxist, get back into the dustbin of history where you belong.
Michael Gove, thank you.
This is a change of Prime Minister at a critical time for our country, perhaps one of the gravest challenges we've faced in a generation. And I think the most important thing is when we get a new Prime Minister, all of us, whoever it is on this stage, we all commit now that we will unite whoever it is behind that individual, and we will deliver Brexit before there's a general election.
And on that note, we will end.
And by the 31st of October.
We've run out of time. Sadly, that brings us to the end of our hour. My thanks to all those who asked their questions tonight, the many, many who sent in their thoughts on email. The candidates face the next round of elimination tomorrow, and we should have the final two by the end of the week. Thank you to all the candidates for participating here tonight. Thank you for watching. Coverage continues on the BBC News channel and on Newsnight on BBC2 at 10:30. Good night. Thanks for watching.